Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Marsh India webinar. We just wait for 1 or 2 minutes before we start. We see a couple of clients and colleagues logging in. So, very good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, which is Silent Cyber, Breaking the Silence for Indian Life Sciences Industry. My name is Tarun Goyal, and I am Life Sciences Industry Leader for Marsh India. Next slide, please. So during the course of the webinar, you are feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. And in case you wish to ask your questions during the Q&A round, please raise hand in the participants window and we will unmute your line. Please do participate in the polling questions that you see coming in during the webinar. Today, I am joined by very eminent panelists, from the industry. Mr. Loic Frua, he is Regional Security Director, Asia Pacific Sanofi. Mr. Gurpreet Singh Jolly, Head of Global Insurance Cell, Sun Pharma. Mr. Y. Kiran, Head Treasury and Insurance, Dr. Reddy's. I'm also joined by my colleagues, Lyndon Rico. He is Regional Cyber and Technical Advisor, joining us from Singapore. Ms. Magda Chally, Head of Cyber and Risk Consulting, Marsh Asia. Next slide, please. So today's agenda, we would like to cover emerging trends in the industry and evolving cyber risk landscape, digital transformation and growing cyber threats, cyber risk quantification, and lesson learned from security and risk management perspective, and silent cyber, followed by live Q&A session. So today, when we talk about the industry, we are seeing a couple of evolving trends, which these trends are not only seen in India but across the globe, internationally. Domestic, so with this pandemic breakout, we halted the entire world, but entire thing which was happening in the life sciences industry was very different. Life sciences industry was toiling hard to kind of working to find a solution for this, for this pandemic. And it is one of the biggest threat in our era, and the industry was really toiling hard. And as we speak, we have some good news, wherein some of the countries are already announcing the date for inoculation, and which is, I think, is one of the path-breaking news of the day. Investment in domestic and R&D and new drug innovation is one of the key things which we see happening by the industry as a whole, wherein the more and more life sciences industry are focusing on developing new drugs, kind of investing into their own R&D facilities in India. Government is strongly focusing on developing biotechnology. They are providing a lot of subsidy around it, setting up biotechnology park, and they are also looking at making the pharma companies more self-reliant. So as to say, when I say self-reliant, you have more and more bulk drug manufacturers facilities are being set up so that the entire country is self-sustained in a self-sustained model and not having reliance on other countries. Growth in demand of medical devices is something which is a new revenue stream that the industry saw when when this pandemic broke out, and I think it's growing, and it has picked up really well. Technology is something, again, technology and the growth or the next level growth goes hand in hand. The success of the industry would lie in how seamlessly, they can adopt technology to drive next level growth, operational efficiencies, cost effectiveness, innovation. All of this put together would be largely technology driven. You have, tools like digital supply network, blockchain, artificial intelligence, big data. I think these are the tools which are really going to shape up the industry going forward. And, but there are certain inherent issues associated, which we'll see in the coming slides. But yes, this is the way to go. Next slide, please. With this, we come to our first poll question. How do you define the scope of a cyber risk? Do you consider that cyber risk is an IT issue or cyber risk is an enterprise issue? I would request all the attendees to, kind of attend to this poll question. Okay, so I think we have 0 to 0 and 1 kind of scenario here. So cyber risk is an enterprise issue. Yes, very true. Every single component of the organization has to be working in tandem to be dealing with this risk issue. Next poll question, please. Which of the following is the most common cyber attacks in life sciences industry? This is a multiple choice question, so you may choose more than one option. Is it ransomware, cyber espionage, phishing attacks, denial of service attacks? Okay, so we have the majority for phishing attacks, followed by ransomware. Then we have denial of service attack and cyber espionage. Yes, I think we have seen all forms of cyber attacks. Go to the next slide, please. So I think what we have seen this far, we see that technology is integral part of taking the industry to the next level, next growth level. Now, with this technology comes along, some inherent risk. But what first we need to understand is, what makes life sciences industry so vulnerable to cyber attacks. I think the significant amount of capital that industry controls and the high sensitivity of information in relation to products or medical research, these two components make the industry so vulnerable. And I think you will see more and more cyber hackers, attacking, making those attacks on different clients. And recently we have seen that this phenomenon has picked up, and ransomware attacks are seen very, very frequently. And in the recent one, we have seen that, it has caused financial damages, to organizations. Business interruption following a cyber incident has become a major concern. Whether it's a ransomware, it's a human error or technical error, should this attack or should this fault leads to loss of critical systems or data, it can very adversely and financially, affect the organizations. As we are all aware, the upcoming, this PDP bill is being talked about for long, but we have an experience, from GDPR as to how it changed the entire industry, the way we have been, working around the data security. World Economic Forum did, conducted a survey, global risk perception survey. This is, basis, this survey was floated and, the respondents were asked that basis their perception as to what risk they feel is the top ones that they would like to vote for. So cyber risk, about 76% plus, respondent were for cyber risk, and they see it as a real threat to their business. With this, I think we have talked about the industry scenario. We have talked about, the cyber, or the technology part. Important thing is that we have to live and we have to grow with the technology. It's all about how we can mitigate risk associated with it, how we can bring in more resiliency. We will talk about in the latest slides about risk assessment, how we can carry out risk assessment, and how we can make our systems less vulnerable to these attacks. With this, I would now like to invite Magda to take us through the digital transformation, growing cyber threats, and cyber risk quantification. Magda, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tarun. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for attending this webinar. So I'm Magda Shelley, leading cyber advisory for Marsh for Asia region, and I have been previously Chief Information Security Officer for various companies. So today, I would like you actually to take away a few very important key messages for your industries, including the fact that cyber is an enterprise problem or a business risk, which you already apparently know, and I was very happy to see that, but as well other aspects related to how to identify cyber risk, clearly understand the impacts following a successful cyber event or a successful cyber attack, and then how to address or build the right or efficient cyber strategy. And for that, we will definitely have more insights and practical views from Loïc Froid, who is here today on the call. But first, let's understand what's happening, not only in the life industry science, but as well across all industries. As Tarun mentioned, and I will not repeat again, things that have already been addressed, but we are seeing an increased level of technology adoption. Every time when we adopt a new technology, we are actually increasing our attack surface with new possible emerging cyber risk. And this is extremely important for all of us to understand. A technology or a new technology doesn't come with security and privacy by default. It actually brings with it, again, as I mentioned, new emerging cyber risk, and it's extremely critical for companies adopting new technologies to have a visibility or identify those emerging cyber risks to build accordingly the right risk management strategy in alignment with your risk appetite. I will come back to that. Let's go to the next slide and understand a little bit further what is happening in the life science industry. First of all, we have seen that the industry is changing tremendously with adopting new technology like big data, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence for analytics. But the other point that is extremely critical is to understand that your organization is not working in silos. That means that it's part of an ecosystem. Within that ecosystem, not only the attack surface for your company is important to consider, but the attack surface, including your vendors and partners, that might present a very important or very high and critical entry point for cyber criminals to perform cyber attacks. Why I'm saying that is because nowadays we're interconnected. The moment that you work or connect yourself to a network, that means that you're exposing yourself to new exposures. And if your network is connected or interconnected with other vendors and partners, therefore, you might be exposed from that particular perspective. Now, when we look at the life science industry and value chain, you are the best positioned to understand all the interactions across this value chain, from working with, for example, additional researchers and develop really valuable data sets that you need to protect, to clinical trials where you actually have a lot of customer data that needs as well to be protected because it's under regulation, to other points where you need to maintain your system's availability at all times, to the fact that you need to market and sell your product. At every time or step of your value chain, not only you have different risks emerging, but as well you need to understand different cyber risks emerging, depending again on where and what business exactly you're doing. So let's go to the next slide, please. And what we have seen, again, it's no matter what industry we're talking, even if here we're addressing life science, every single industry have been attacked. And the reason being is because not only we're adopting technology as mentioned from the introduction, but as well we are dependent on technology. And as I mentioned, when we adopt a new technology, that new technology comes in with eventual emerging risks. Those risks are related to vulnerabilities. The vulnerabilities might be weaknesses across people, process, or technology. And cyber criminals, who might be just criminals using technologies, will exploit those weaknesses to perform cyber attacks. And now, of course, those are the results. We are seeing of a big increase of cyber crimes, ranging from data breaches to business interruption. And of course, all those cyber crimes lead to one thing: financial losses for the organization. Those financial losses, again, are led by the fact that whenever companies are implementing cyber strategy, there are 2 points that are extremely critical for you to understand. First of all, the fact that an effective cyber strategy needs to rely on a balance between people, process, and technology. And second point, which is as well extremely important, 100% security does not exist. So you are unable to expect your security or your IT team to enable you to reach 100% security. That's not the correct or efficient goal to achieve. What you need to do within your organization is to understand and have a clear visibility of your cyber risk in order to perform informative decisions on what to do with those cyber risks when you identify them. Let's go a little bit further and understand examples of cyber attacks within the industry. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when we're talking again about cyber strategy and ensuring building an efficient cyber resilience even, and I will come back about cyber resilience, we need to understand this balance between people, process, and technology. But when we see in general the top security concern, we realize that aside from the fact that we need the balance, we as well as organizations need to focus on the weakest points. And the weakest points, as per the statistics, are around weaknesses in process and people before even technology. So no matter what tools you will have in place, those tools will not be able to perform magically whatever security you like or you want as an organization. You need, again, to have clear visibility of your cyber risk and address it accordingly to your risk appetite, understand what controls you need to implement across people, process, and technology, and especially have a clear visibility that cyber attacks or cyber criminals start by exploiting people and weaknesses first. So let's again go back and have a clear visibility of some practical old cyber attacks or previous cyber attacks with the next slides. The security breaches that we see across the newspapers and all the articles are exploiting weaknesses across people, process, and technology, as I mentioned. And I would like you to remember that if an organization has only a technical implementation or has technical controls, their cybersecurity strategy will not be efficient, because it is critical to have a balance between process and people and technology. And again, Loic will give you more details. But as I mentioned, when we talk and discuss security breaches that exploit people and process and technology, let's see the previous cyber attacks with clear, practical examples. Next slide, please. So within different case studies that we can see, one important point or impact on businesses is business interruption. When we're talking about cyber attacks, what really matters for the business is, are they able to perform their traditional or business activities, or are they interrupted? Every day or business interruption means a loss of profit or a loss of revenue. And therefore, that is a very important business risk that needs to be considered. And we can see here a few case studies showing, for example, in July 2019 with La Roche, which has been attacked by a malicious software that led to a business interruption. We have other examples like Merck and Eurofins Scientific. They have both actually been as well attacked with a risk that materialized leading to a business interruption. When we're talking about business interruption, not only we definitely have a loss of business revenue, but we need to as well understand the additional cost. For example, the cost of investigation when those businesses are interrupted, the cost related to communication with the clients because you are unable to let them know that you cannot perform your usual activities, the cost of recovery, the cost eventually of any litigation or legal costs related to the fact that you're unable to continue your business activities, etc. So one very important or interesting cyber risk is related to the materialization of a cyber attack leading to a business interruption. And here you can see in the slide, very interesting case studies. Let's go now to the next slide and understand further another case study or case studies where in this particular case, a cyber attack leads to data breaches. And what makes it different is that in this particular case, we are talking mostly about very valuable information or data sets to your organization. And when we're talking about digital assets or data sets, for life science industry, I perceive or see that as two types of very important data sets. One, you have your research that has actually been there and built over years and years with a very important budget. Then, two, you have personal data of your customers or your employees as well that has a very important value. Now, if we're talking about a business risk related to data breach or materializing as a data breach, this as well might lead to financial implications for the company, including the fact that the company might need to pay some very important fines due to the leakage of data. And we can see examples like, for example, in Asia, where Sync Health has been as well part of a victim of a data breach, leading to an important number of records of personal data being leaked. Now, when we look at the implications or impacts on the business from the fact that the reputation of the business might be affected to the fact that the business might need to pay additional fines, we as well need to consider additional impacts that might relate to the loss of shares, market share, or just the loss of potential partners and vendors that we have been working with that might even go to blacklist the businesses following a data breach. Let's go further with the next slides, please. So cybersecurity is not about reaching 100% security, because 100% security does not exist, as I mentioned. We have seen case studies where cyber attacks led either to a business interruption or to data breaches. Those different types of case studies also show you the impact on the business. And therefore, to reduce or to address the cyber risk accordingly, it's really important to address controls across people, process, and technology, and do not focus only on IT or general cybersecurity tools as the way ahead. And especially when it comes to people and process, it is really critical to understand how they are exploited. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the life science industry can be as well addressed or basically attacked through exploiting the people, as I mentioned. And this is a very good example and a very popular one. Very often, cyber attacks, as I mentioned, start with phishing. This example actually of a very important data breach in Singapore started with a malicious phishing email and an employee that clicked on a link. So here, the security breach exploit a weakness in people. Let's go to the next slide, please. The second example here, it's actually an example that exploits not people, but technology. And in this case, in particular, it is a malicious software called Winty that led to a ransomware or a malicious software that encrypts the systems and the files of the company, attacking or leading to a business interruption of the company Roche. In this case, again, it's actually a weakness in technology that led to this attack. Now, one important aspect here that comes often in my discussions with clients is by mentioning that we have an antivirus or an anti-malware in place. Well, cyber criminals are aware about the security controls of companies, and they take sometimes weeks and months to find a way to circumvent security controls and then build a customized attack to attack the company. Don't forget that they ask afterwards for a ransom that is very high, and therefore it's worth for them to spend that amount of time. Let's go now to the last example of security breaches exploiting processes. So when we're talking about, again, cybersecurity being about people, process, and technology, I mentioned that security breaches can exploit people and technology. And here, the third example shows you an example of security breaches exploiting processes. A very common as well attack in Asia is business email compromise with fraudulent invoices or payment requests, where a company or precisely in the accounting department will receive an invoice coming up from, for example, a vendor with a changed bank account. Now, the accountant, for example, will not ask for any additional verification and proceed with the payment to what is actually a fraudulent invoice or a fraudulent bank account. This led to many millions of financial losses in Asia in particular. So as you have seen in those slides, it's not about technology only. It's about ensuring that you understand the weaknesses across people, process, and technology and build your controls to protect the data and your system from attacks with a balance across those three pillars. Now let's go a little bit further as well and understand cyber risk quantification. I am aware of time, so I will try to go straight to the point. Let's go to the next slide, please. And I would like first to understand what are the measures that you think would be beneficial for your organization to strengthen your cybersecurity. Looking forward to your answers. Let's see the results. Interesting. Incident response plan, penetration testing, and continuous vulnerability management is the highest response. Definitely is extremely important to be prepared when an incident happens, because it's not anymore if. Nowadays, cyber incidents happen every day. And what you can control is not if the incident happened, but the impact and the exposure of that incident towards your organization or your business. Let's go quickly and understand what do we mean by cyber risk quantification and why it's important when you need to build your strategy. Now, while we asked you those questions, what's the most important for your organization? And we've seen the responses. I would say the first aspect is to understand your cyber risk and identify those. Then you decide, depending on the risk appetite of your company and your organization, what to do with that particular risk. Should you treat it, transfer it, or terminate it, or accept it? At the same time, if you have clear visibility of your cyber risk, you will be able to understand, if properly quantified, what initiatives that you need to implement will reduce the risk the most efficiently and the most interestingly for your organization. So let's go further and understand that particular aspect. When we're talking about cyber risk again, and talking about initiatives, what is critical for you as a cybersecurity professional or risk manager is to understand if your risk first is residual risk in terms of cyber is aligned with your risk appetite or the risk appetite of your organization. What do I mean by that? Is your organization fine to be, for example, interrupted within 3 or 4 days or 3 or 4 hours? If you don't have that visibility, you're unable to build the right controls across people, process, and technology and have the right prioritization in place. So let's go further with the next slide around cyber risk quantification and understanding. Oh, that was part of the presentation. Let's go back. Cyber risk quantification, again, what it allows you to understand is how much I will lose money as an organization if a risk materializes, and am I able to take that risk as an organization? in order to achieve that, we at Marsh, and in general, there is one concept that is extremely valuable. It's called cyber risk quantification. And within the next slide, I give you more insights about what exactly that means. Next slide, please. So first of all, when we talk about cyber risk, again, it's important to understand how a cyber risk can materialize. In order to understand that, we can build a scenario that helps us to not only define what cyber attack can lead to a cyber loss scenario, but as well to understand the likelihood or the event frequency, as well as the impact or loss magnitude of that event. Again, as I mentioned, if a cyber attack happens and it leads to a cyber risk that is business interruption, how much that will cost your business, what are the impacts on your business, and how often that might happen today within your ecosystem. That is what we are able to do with cyber risk quantification. Now, when you have that visibility, you are able to actually perform or decide which cybersecurity initiatives are the most urgent or the most important for your business. So let's go a little bit to the next point, please, and understand more from Loic about practical aspect, especially as a security professional working with a life science company. Loic, over to you, but I'm aware that there is a poll as well from the audience that we would like to hear just immediately after this slide.
So am I the one? So the question here is, according to you, which aspect of the business make your organization more vulnerable to cyber risk? So you can of course use multiple choice. Okay, so the people, technology. So yeah, this is interesting because it reflects what Magda said. First, the fact that most of the time when an incident happened, there is someone who made a mistake at the beginning. And also the problem that technology doesn't come as a security mean only, but it comes at the same time as security asset, as well as a weapon that can be used against our organization. Regarding the process, it all depends on what kind of process we're talking about, and it also depends on how the processes are protected. But most of the time, the processes are protected by people and technology. And so, in fact, when you go and when you speak of people and technology as vulnerability, I think that it's important. So first of all, I just want to insist on the fact that I'm going to be very basic in my remarks because I'm not an expert in cyber. I'm responsible of corporate security, so physical security, people protection, event protection, crisis management. And in fact, I work on cybersecurity jointly with our IT department. In our company, we work for information protection. I would say kind of two-hand job. IT is responsible for the protection of the servers, of the hardware, of IT population, and corporate security is in charge of awareness, education of users. So I think that the first thing to have in mind is to make sure that we respect the basic principles, because like everywhere, like in sport, like in a job, like in daily life, we need to be faithful to the fundamentals and to the principles. The main goal to achieve here is first, not to be an easy target, and second, not to become a statistic in the risk world. What I just mentioned is that the weakness is most of the time a human mistake and not a technology issue. So this is very important to keep in mind because it emphasizes the role of education in the preparation and the preparedness of the company to cyber risk. The second thing is that, especially in the current situation where most of people work from home, we need to reverse the slogan that we usually use in office when we tell people, do not do in office what you would not do at home. So for example, you would not leave your door open, you would not leave your wallet available for the burglar. So now we have to reverse, and we need to tell people, do at home what you would do in office. What I mean is that do not leave your passwords everywhere. Respect also the clear desk policy. Destroy your documents accordingly with shredders and everything, because even at home, in fact, you are not completely clear of threat and risk. If you put your documents directly in the bin, it's not safer at home than in office. So people need to respect at home the same security basics and principles than they are respecting and they are reminded when we are in office. I think that in the current moment, we also need to increase the messages for people to report when they receive phishing email, social engineering, malicious email, fraudulent communication, because doing so, they give the possibility of having some trends and having some knowledge of who is more targeted, which BU, which department, which country, which affiliate, instead of just destroying the email, because it's also important to try to determine the trends of the risk. And that's what I mentioned on the line below. Destroying the malicious email is not enough. We need to have information about what happens. And I think that when we encourage people to report, it also serves as increasing the awareness, because when you repeat the people to report the incident, to report the malicious emails, in fact, it rings the bell so that they are more, I would say, vigilant. Finally, I think that when people report, we are more in a position to send warning messages to the rest of the company. And doing so, people are more prepared not to be vulnerable when an attack comes, because we must understand that hacking is not something people do for fun. They do it because it is a business. It brings money to them. So when they find a soft target, because people are vulnerable, people inside the company don't talk to each other, as long as they can gain information from that company, they will continue attacking it. As soon as they will see that the company is prepared and the people do not respond to the malicious email, do not click on the fraudulent link, are not vulnerable, in fact, they will give up this target and they will choose another one. So it's very important for that to make people understand that the faster information circulates into the company, inside the company, the stronger the company is and the stronger the target is. What is also important in the current moments is that we are all using remote means, remote assets, remote communication channels, Zoom, for example, and we very often share our screens. I think that as soon as we start a Zoom meeting, people should be aware of not leaving anything open on their desktop. Because when you share your screen, people see what you have on your screen. And I'm pretty sure that if you think of it, all of you, you remember a Zoom meeting when people shared a screen and you saw something that you were not really supposed to see. I don't mean that it was bad or it was a crisis situation, but I mean that it was not meant for everyone to be seen. And I can give you an example. A few weeks ago, I had a Zoom meeting with someone, and the guy shared his screen, and there was his Teams chat box, and he was speaking of a person who was attending the meeting in terms which were not that good. And fortunately, the guy immediately after opened the document for the meeting, and I understand that the person who was targeted by the exchange on the screen didn't see it, but nevertheless, some of others saw it. So be very careful when you share your screen, and for that, the reflex to have is that as soon as the Zoom meeting starts, you close everything on your desktop. It's better to show a desktop which is not very well in order than to show your mailbox or to show your chat box. Finally, on Zoom, check all your participants to avoid people who attend your Zoom meeting without having been invited, and use for that all the security features that Zoom propose, ID, password, and everything. And once again, it does not happen to others, because me personally, I had one example a few months ago where we had someone, and initially I thought it was the cell phone was one participant, because sometimes the cell phone have ID which are a little bit different than the normal names and everything. And as soon as I asked who this person was, he or she disconnected and left the Zoom meeting. So definitely it was an imposter. Next slide, please. So the consequences of COVID-19 are very specific regarding cyber attacks and regarding our industry. So I just put a few figures, but you had some which have been given before, and I'm pretty sure that since the COVID-19 crisis started, you all have read dozens of surveys, articles, which give the huge dimension of the increase of the cyber attacks, the cost and everything. So I'm not going to elaborate on that. I just want to insist on two things. The first thing is that for hackers, nothing changed, because working from home is their working environment. So for them, it's not complicated to work from home. So they are in their environment. We are not in our own environment. So we are those who are destabilized compared to the hacker. For the hacker, it continues. Whether you work on home or you work in office, for him, it's the same thing. For you, it's very different. The second thing is that we need to understand that the strategic importance and the resilience of the companies becomes a risk. Why? Because the fact of being strategic makes the company very attractive. And there is, in that sense, what I am calling the shift of cyber espionage. Nowadays, do you really think that the hackers are going to continue targeting massively aeronautics company, for example? I'm not really sure that this is their priority. The current situation proves that now a big target is biotech, pharma companies, vaccine companies, and definitely all the life science companies and the life science sector, which has proven strategic and which is strategic for the next few years at least, are definitely an increasing target for hackers. And of course, the resilience is also attractive, because it shows that we continue to develop and to work as normal, which means that we have the same exchanges, we have the same communication flows, which can be interrupted, disrupted, and listened. A final point, which is not a third point because it's a very specific one. We all have read that in the past years, there is more and more awareness about insider threats inside the companies. And definitely the current situation and the consequences of COVID favors this insider threat problem. So that's absolutely no doubt. Next slide. I would like to finish on two specific schemes which have been developed not during the COVID crisis, but which I think have been intensified during the COVID crisis, which are the phishing and social engineering schemes, which include, which use LinkedIn and WhatsApp. LinkedIn has become a must use by the companies at HR. Nowadays, if you want to find a job, if you work in HR, you will go on LinkedIn. So people are more and more elaborate on LinkedIn about themselves, about their experience, about their job description, about what they can do, what they would like to do. And some people definitely use their profile and their resume in LinkedIn to attract people. So these people can attract a legitimate company, a legitimate employer, but of course they can also attract people who just want to use and just want to thieve the information from the guy who has published his or her resume. So people use LinkedIn, either they use a compromised account or they just use a fake account to contact people and to attract them. It's very important. And once again, it does not happen only to others. I have a colleague just last week, he received 3 invitations on LinkedIn asking him for a consultant's document. They told him that it would not take a lot of time for him, but they were very interested in his experience and blah, blah, blah. And they were proposing to pay him $300 for this document. So he had 3 invitations in 1 week. And the big difference with the scams that we saw in the past and which are still existing is that the email was perfectly written. There was no mistake, no typo, no. Everything was very well written, taking into account his real experience. So what his profile in LinkedIn reflects. So it's very important for people to be aware of that, because we all are human. When we are flattered, we are likely to respond. So people need to be very careful, because these people use flattery for attracting people. Another scheme of LinkedIn is that you can be asked to visit a company which is supposed to be a starting company, and they saw your resume, and they are very, very, very attracted by your expertise, because they would like to know how a company in life science work, whether it is in finance, in security, in marketing, in procurement, so that they can quickly reach a maturity level to be not a competitor, but to be a good partner to the rest of the sector. And I personally know 2 people who were proposed this. The first one accepted. He was paid $1,000 US to go to a specific place. He was hosted in a 5-star hotel for 2 days. He made a basic presentation back in his hometown, in his working place. He just resumed his work normally, and suddenly he began receiving emails asking for documents, asking for policies of his company and everything. So he had to stop exchanging there, And the second one received a similar invitation that he refused to answer. In this kind of situation, of course, the first thing to do is to report to cyber, but also to management and to compliance, because these starting companies are definitely fed, I would say, created by competitors who would like to get access to our information without effort. And the second network which is used is, of course, WhatsApp, because as soon as the fish has been hooked, what is important is to continue exchanging, and WhatsApp is the most favored as a mean used by hackers to maintain the dialogue, to develop the exchange, and bring the victim to share information, documents, and everything. Finally, the financial frauds that Magda mentioned before. Financial fraud happen every day. Every day companies are targeted by frauds. First, because the banking process and invoice process, or bank transfer processes are always very complicated. And a lot of companies, even those who do not report, are victim of financial fraud very often. What people absolutely need to understand is that unless you lose a huge amount of money, police will never investigate your case, because they have not enough resources to investigate the cases. So it's much better to prepare the people in charge of invoice, finance, and everything, than to complain because we lose $10,000 or $50,000, which is an amount which will never be investigated. So that's what I just wanted to say, very basic, because once again, like I said, I'm not expert in cyber, but I'm very convinced that cyber is not only an IT issue. Like you said before, it is a business risk, and this business risk means that it has to be managed by the management and by all the departments in the company. Only a transverse cooperation can bring a successful result against this threat. So I pass the floor to Lyndon.
Thanks, Loic. So yeah, I'm Lyndon. I'm the Regional Cyber and Technical Manager for Marsh. And in this final section of the presentation, we're going to talk about silent cyber impacts on insurance. But first up, I believe we have another poll question. So in light of the current situation, which amongst the following is the most critical cyber risk exposure for you? So is it information and data theft, physical asset damage, or is it business interruption? Let's see what the answers are. Yeah, look, 71% on both information, data theft, and business interruption. This is very key to what we're actually going to be talking about, because people don't consider cyber risk resulting in a physical peril. And that's the topic of this last section that I'm presenting is so silent cyber. So if we look at what the situation overview is for the industry, new technologies blurring risk between the physical and non-physical. So physical, fire and flood, and cyber, so non-physical perils. And insurers' policy wordings have always lagged behind the technology risks and the technology threat landscape. So we're actually seeing now insurers looking to affirm or exclude cyber risks from non-cyber policies, so traditional insurance property, such as property and casualty liability policies. So these proposed exclusions, though, are impacting coverage quite heavily and are sometimes overreaching to exclude physical risks merely because technology is in the chain of causation of a potential loss. So we've got an excerpt here out of the Marsh Microsoft Cyber Survey report of 2019, and it's already pointing out, a heavy adoption of technology for clients. But if we really look at it now over the COVID period, a lot of clients have been forced into a digital transformation. So I'd imagine those numbers would be a lot higher. So if we look at the next slide, we're going to try to define what silent cyber is. So silent or non-affirmative cyber is unexpected cyber exposure within traditional lines of insurance. So property and liability, marine crime, that insurers apparently neither underwrote nor charged for, nor effectively excluded. But those potential exposures now, we're seeing within traditional policies, such as property and liability, which won't implicitly include or exclude the risk, but could theoretically pay claims and have paid cyber claims. So, when an insurance policy is triggered for an event, generally when it's related to cyber, it's going to be one of these three key points. It's going to be one, cyber events as triggered for loss are not explicitly included or excluded, so silent. Two, there's exclusionary language within the policy, but it's ambiguous. And number three, this express coverage grants are ambiguous or conflict with other policy wordings that the client might currently have. So if we look to the next slide, the consequences of cyber risk and how it relates to loss. It's a malicious attack. A cyber event's a malicious attack or accidental event impacting data, computers, network, or technology, leading to an impact, which could be any one of the ones you're seeing on the screen there, from encrypted data, security breach, so systems getting breached by a hacker, privacy violations, regulatory investigations for losing personally identifiable information, phishing and fraud. We've already touched on that throughout the presentation. It's the most prevalent that we do see in the region. Brick computers. So brick computers are essentially computers that become so heavily affected by malware, they become as useless as a brick. But the key point we're talking about here today is what's been highlighted, and that's in the property damage and liability aspect of cyber policies. So we know that a cyber event can actually cause physical perils. But what are the overall, from cyber risk, what are the consequences? Often it's going to be your first party costs. So the costs associated with bringing in IT forensics firms, third party IT forensics firms, in to rectify systems or remove malware or try and decrypt encrypted data. Loss of income is a big one, so business interruption losses, the losses associated with revenue loss due to having a cyber event. Liabilities, so third-party liabilities. So in the event that you do lose personally identifiable information, personal health information, sensitive corporate information, the liabilities associated with losing that data, fines and penalties. So any fines and penalties that might be imposed by a regulator around the world, and all the different regions do have very significant, very different regulatory requirements. And then extortion demands is a big one tied to ransomware, obviously, and then negligence in service and shareholder litigation is also a potential consequence of cyber risk. And on the next slide, I'm really just trying to provide you with an overview of how a traditional insurance policy, is meant to operate. So for property, covers real and personal property and business interruption from physical loss or damage to tangible policy. So, however, if the resulting damage, physical damage, comes from the example that we're given here, that a malware attack scrambles the data in a programmable controller, leading to a fire in a production facility, we now have to look at that and say, well, is that covered, or would that be covered if there is non-affirmative cyber exclusions placed on traditional lines of insurance policies? And the same thing goes for casualty. So for marine, aviation, automotive, third-party bodily injury, and property damage. So if we look to the example that we're using here, this is software update to key operating systems, has bad code and causes systems to go offline during operation, leading to crashes and causing the operator's owners to incur liability. So once again, you know, if it's an indirect cause, like a cyber attack, that ends up in a physical loss, is it going to be covered? And the insurance industry is changing to try and exclude these sorts of perils in their traditional programs. Liability is another one. So third-party bodily injury, property damage. Generally would be cyber exclusions imposed on those policies. The example, cyber attack causes the store's heating system to overheat, causes an explosion, and bodily injury and property damage ensues. So once again, you know, would that be covered if there were cyber exclusions imposed on those policies? And the last one there is from financial lines, not as heavily impacted by silent cyber exclusions, is directors and officers, so cover for litigation or regulatory action arising out of the failure to disclose misrepresentations or breaches of fiduciary duty. Publicly traded company experiences a data breach, and that ultimately leads to a stock drop and securities class action lawsuit. So if there was a non-affirmative endorsement on a D&O policy protecting directors, would the policy actually kick in? Would it trigger? These are the things that we have to consider in the new world of cyber exclusions in insurance. So insurers' concerns, if we look at the concerns on the next slide, and you know, what are some of the insurers' concerns driving silent cyber changes? So they are imposing these non-affirmative wordings in policies, and this is resulting in coverage and cyber exposures, or limiting, trying to limit the exposure. And you know, what is this creating for the insurance industry, for brokers and underwriters alike? And what do we have to avoid? You know, we're looking at coverage disputes, claims stemming from cyber events under non-cyber policies that didn't expressly address cover for. Pricing, you know, wasn't accurately priced for the significant cyber risks that might be in a traditional property and casualty policy. And the risk exposure insurance is not adequately measured. So the underwriters actually don't understand significantly the cyber exposures that they're actually taking on through their insurance contracts. And so the accumulation, silent cyber accumulation aggregation is not identified insurers or measured by insurers across their physical and then the non-physical book of business when it comes to their insurance contracts. And the exposure to systemic risk across their entire book. I think we'll go to the next slide because it's really going to highlight, you know, it's not the be all and end all of why this is happening, but it's a very key indicator of what woke insurers up. And that was the NotPetya attack in 2017, non-targeted attack, caused major disruptions globally to all industry segments. And the total losses that we did see from it, and this is insurance losses, is $3 billion and counting. And 90% of those losses were driven by silent cyber impacts in traditional insurance policies. Only 10% were under cyber insurance contracts. And this is really one of the key reasons why we're seeing insurers now look to limit their exposure or price adequately, or try and provide solutions within the market. And it has been a problematic initial response by insurers. So if we go to the next slide. So there's no consistent approach across the markets. So the Prudential Regulatory Authority in London has imposed these in London, but global insurers are going to be doing the same thing. No consistent approach in the language or in the endorsements or in the products to sublimit cover or provide a level of cover, or completely exclude the cover. And so that lack of consistency and market capacity among cyber products and solutions in accordance with the exclusions that have been introduced. But this is evolving. Unfortunately, insurance evolves quite slowly, but we are starting to see products that are very specific to certain industries that are trying to address this. Addressing the gaps in cover that might be created by the exclusionary language and sublimits, and trying to narrow that gap for clients is really, you know, what we are trying to do on a daily basis across our entire insurance program. And, you know, full clarity and transparency with clients, you know, as insurance clients are informed of any limitations in cover introduced by insurers. And also to try and narrow the gap and look to try and provide a standalone cyber insurance product. I'm aware of the limited time frame, so there are a few exclusions there on the right-hand side. None of these, not many of these are new. Most of them are fairly old. The LMAs are quite new, and they're very broad in their exclusionary language. But really, you should be looking at all the clients, and everyone on the call should be looking at all their insurance programs and seeing if there is any new cyber exclusions being imposed on any of those programs, and asking why is this happening. Generally, it's going to fall. I mean, the insurers are responding, and ideally, this is what we would hope to see. You know, it's going to fall into one of four buckets when we start to see these non-affirmative cyber endorsements applied on insurance products. And number one would be affirming all physical cyber exposure within a policy, regardless of technology involvement. I mean, this is quite an ideal situation. The advantages would be no cover reduction or need for an alternative, one policy, single policy for all triggers, and no disputes over cyber definitions. Disadvantages, sublimits for intangible cyber losses potentially. Doesn't cover the full gamut of cyber risk and sublimits for intangible losses, so that a standalone cyber policy would actually provide, and potentially a lot higher premium for such a product. Number two would be affirming all physical cyber exposure, but sublimited. So only really one key advantage, you know, the client or the broker knows there is some coverage insured within the program. Where the coverage, when it was silent, was unlimited, now is actually sublimited. Excluding all cyber exposures, there's only one advantage, and that's clarity. You know, you don't have any coverage. Premium reduction is unlikely on the traditional policy during this hard market time that we actually are going through. Or for excluding all cyber exposures, but inserting write-backs for certain perils and losses, and we do see some of these. It is better than an absolute exclusion, but it's not as comprehensive as the total affirmation of coverage, and it might not actually write back all the traditionally provided cyber perils. So if we really look at the last slide here, and this just as a general overview, this is what a cyber insurance policy provides. So this is a policy that doesn't actually provide the physical losses. This is for the intangibles and the non-physical cyber losses. So it's broken up into a first and third party coverage. It's very broad coverage. It was born in a soft market. But really, when I talk to clients about this, the most key part about it is the event management and the breach response. So the first point we're talking about there in the first party coverages, and that's the cost associated with bringing in IT forensics, engaging public relations or notification center or a legal firm in the event that you have a cyber attack. And most insurers actually have a suite or a vendor panel of all these professional services that are provided with the policy. Business interruption, so non-physical business interruption, specifically cyber business interruption, so extra expenses and loss of business income. Extortion and ransomware, so very costly points would be the engagement of IT forensics to try and unencrypt data or try and remove malware or ransomware. So it's the cost associated with bringing in IT forensics, but it's also the cost associated with paying ransom. So the insurance will actually pay ransom as well as a last resort. Another key point on the first party covers would be data restoration and the cost to replace, restore, recreate damaged, lost, or manipulated data. On the third party side, it's a very broad liability policy. So essentially, if a company loses personally identifiable information, health information, payment card information, sensitive corporate information, then it's the cost associated with settlements and defense costs. network security liability as well. So passing malware to a third party that is impacted financially from a cyber event that they can trace came from your systems. It's associated costs with settlement and defense costs that they might level at you for the transmission or being a conduit for to the virus. And privacy regulatory defense costs, but this can also encapsulate fines and penalties where insurable. So the insurance in a majority of countries in the world will actually pay for fines and penalties for any sort of breach of personal data law, privacy data laws. So, I mean, that's one way that we can look to reduce the gaps in coverage, is the standalone cyber policy. But like I said, we're seeing, the biggest issues we are seeing in the market right now is insurers unwilling or aren't fast enough to actually provide effective solutions for silent cyber impact. So that's where they're happy to exclude from their property and casualty policies cyber risks. They're not actually coming up with any solutions that are going to be very effective for clients. So I was very conscious of the time, but that was the last slide from my end. And we can move on to the Q&A.
Yes, thank you, Lyndon. Thank you for very insightful presentation. Quickly, in the interest of time, I will just quickly move on to the Q&A, and I have a few questions. My first question is directed to Mr. Jolly, and so Mr. Jolly, I mean, from the use of technology in the life sciences industry has evolved during the last few years, including automation in production and supply chain to significant technology adoptions like big data, artificial intelligence, and others. What are your thoughts on the changing cyber risk landscape for the Indian life sciences industry? Mr. Jolly, I think you have to unmute yourself.
Sure. Sorry, Tarun. Thanks, Tarun, and thanks, Loic, Lyndon, and Magda for this insightful presentation. That was really, really well. That there are only a few presentations I have gone through, which is, is very useful, and this is one of them first. And second, Tarun, as the risk landscape is continuously evolving, and we as a risk manager facing the opportunity and a threat at a pace which is very much different from that of the past. So there is always a black swan, and nobody knows which way the next ball will turn up. So in order for us to be ahead of the crowd, it is not only that pace, but also we'll have to think in an unthinkable sphere, because that hackers and attackers, always thinks multifold ahead of us, So cyber risk has become a bigger risk than a natural catastrophic losses. It is fast, furious, and the threat for cyber attacks are rising on a new level every day, because everything from household to the aircraft, everything is connected with this, internet, which is the gateway for all these losses. And, that cross-border cyber, that attacks have been risen like anything. And if you see, with respect to the pharmaceutical company, it is obvious that, if an individual or a company is having anything valuables, then they will be targeted by the malicious ways. And pharmaceutical companies are equally prone to it because of this intellectual property rights, and also for, that clinical trial data and everything else, And this applies to, that Indian life sciences industry as well, because, that scope is much broader and the complex than earlier before. But the thing is, Tarun, as we have seen that there is absolutely not possible to have that kind of 100% security, as, the Magda says in the presentation, and also, the Lyndon and the Loic, So what we need to do is that, there is we'll have to run through a complete risk cyclic process, which is very much important. Because one thing I wanted to point out here is that, there is a clear-cut difference between a premium and a kind of, that cyber exposures do we have, because, as against that $5 billion of kind of, that cyber premium as of today, but the exposures could be in trillions of dollars by the 2025 years, So the thing is, in another 5 years, if you are having a kind of an exposure in trillions of dollars, and you are just, grabbing that premium in just about $5 billion, obviously the insurance propositions may not be sustainable. You'll have to think of, beyond that insurance, there has to be an integrated insurance and, that risk proposition. And for my opinion, the complete risk cyclic process is very, very important. Because I'm of the, firm believer of that definition of the ISO 31000, that risk is an effect of uncertainty on that objectives, So first we'll have to see our objective, then, we'll have to see the risk associated with, prioritize them, and then the most important thing is plan and implement, followed by, risk review, risk reporting, and other things, But the central portion is that implementation of whatever learning we have, we are attending this kind of sessions, and also there are blah blah things available throughout the day. But unless we actually implement the risk, through the people and processes, as Magda has defined it, it's very, very important to implement it, because it's a very common riddle. Probably everybody would have hear of this, that there are 5 frogs sitting on a log, and 4 decided to jump off. How many are left? The answer is all 5 are left, because there is a difference between deciding to do something and actually implementing this. So my view is that strategy to cyber crimes is not different for life sciences. It is equivalent to every industry. We should be proactive, so that the insurance is not the kind of a guaranteed solutions henceforth, unless there is a kitty equivalent to the potential losses. But we'll have to do the proactive and reactive risk management practices well in place. And also that IT is not that only point wherein we should think of, as Magda has said. Everybody from that security guard to the CEO, everybody is responsible. So building a risk culture is equally important for this cyber.
Very well said, sir. Very well said. It's the risk management, because we have to co-live with the risk, but it's the risk management that would come into play, and we have to manage it intelligently. My next question to Kiran: with changing workplace norms and adaptive working practice being implemented in the life sciences industry, what are the measures being adopted by the life sciences companies to address the risk to data arising from remote working environments? I mean, we are getting these live questions. So, Kiran, over to you.
Thanks, Arun. See, data protection was a very critical component of a life sciences industry even before the pandemic. But in a finite workplace, secured workplace, it was far easier to implement some controls. Now, since the boundaries of workplace have disappeared, it's become all the more complex now. And it's in that sense, the risk of data theft or data loss has increased manifold now. I would look at the measures in 3 parts: prevention, detection, and awareness. So some of the obvious measures which organizations would be taking, include restricting access to internet on the company laptops, having adequate antivirus protections or firewalls, frequent password changes or password policies, and also restricting, of course, access to the company data through VPNs, etc. These are all part of the prevention exercise. But cyber crime itself is a evolving crime, and there is none of the measures can be static, and hence it's important to go back and keep checking whether the measures implemented are adequate and all. And it is there that something like a vulnerability assessment or a penetration testing periodically to see whether we are whether the controls are working or not also becomes important. So this comes under the detection segment. And last but not the least is the awareness part. I think Magda also raised this, highlighted this, that 91% of all the breaches happen through phishing emails. invariably, whenever a breach happens, it is linked, traced back to an employee inadvertently clicking on an attachment coming from an unknown source, or clicking on a URL which is coming from an unknown source. So it's important. So training and awareness is very important. Of course, apart from the usual mailers that we keep sending, and some kind of trainings and questionnaires being circulated, etc. One of the important measures also which companies adopt is actually to do some kind of an ethical hacking, where probably the information security team keeps spraying random phishing emails to the employees on its own, and sees and just looks at how many people fall for the trap. And whoever has clicked on a link inadvertently, they're taken through a special training course, and then and then possibly so that ensure that they don't fall into the same trap when a real attack happens. So employee training awareness is kind of probably the most important among the three. So somebody aptly put it, saying that it's for cybersecurity, it's better to be paranoid than to be complacent. So
yes,
these, I think, are some of the measures. As again Magda said, there's no 100% cure for this risk, but we need to keep evolving our mitigation measures.
Sure, Karim. Thank you so much for this insightful answer. Loic, any passing remarks on what Karim said?
No, I fully agree. I just would like to mention that sometimes I find a little bit too easy just to say it relies on employees, because I think that it relies on employees, but employees will move only if their managers move. So I think that everything starts from the management, and the management makes the employees responsible for what they are doing. If the management doesn't care, the employees will never care. So I think that at the very beginning of anything, as soon as we speak about anything which is related to business, the management has the responsibility to impulse and to make sure that people understand that they are dedicated and they are committed to this activity, whether it is a risk or a positive action. But as long as the management is not involved and committed, and I would say openly and visibly committed, I think it will be very hard for the employees to feel fully responsible.
Yeah, thanks, Loic. My next question to Mr. Jolly again. Between affirmative and silent cyber, how do you approach the matter, and what recommendations would you give to our audience? I mean, this is something which has just popped up, so I think it's a very interesting question. Mr. Jolly, would you like to attack?
Yeah. Thanks, Tarun. Obviously, every organization would prefer to have an kind of an affirmative cyber cover, but as that Lyndon rightly said, is that it's not rightly available, and there are more silent exclusions and silent cyber risks are only available at the market. And this is because of that. That penetration is not up to the mark. As I've already told, is that the premium market is just about $5 billion, and you are saying is that in 2025, the $5 trillion of that cyber exposures would be there, So we cannot expect it that, insurance company would be in a kind of, giving some kind of a respite to us in a near future. And you have seen this property market, wherein, there is a favorable kind of an, ultimately gap in the reinsurers, and still they are, resisting to give us the kind of traditional covers which we used to have in kind of, very handy at one point of a time. So I am of the view is that in the near future I don't foresee that kind of that insurance company would give us kind of that affirmative things of even for that most wanted coverage of that fake presidents and social engineering, like would be having some kind of a very minimal sublimits or so. And there are a lot of exclusions, and as Lyndon said, that in the property there is a cyber exclusion, in cyber there is a property exclusion. And there is a need to have that kind of a cyber gap policy. But even that cyber gap is not coming to us in a kind of an abundant limit. Even that cyber gap would be in a kind of $10 million, $20 million, $30 million kind of a policy. But you know, there is still a gap. But you know, correct me if I'm wrong, Lyndon. But I don't think, you know, we are going to have some kind of solutions in the near future, despite.
No, I totally agree. And the new products or the extensions or the gap coverage, like you said, you're only going to see 10, maybe up to $20 million worth of capacity. Insurers still don't know how to price the risk. They have enough difficulty in pricing standalone cyber risk, and I think it's something that's going to be an evolving process. They want to see what the losses potentially could be, get all that actuarial data and all that information, and then really formulate strategies around products. The only problem is that we are now in the fourth industrial revolution, and we need these insurance products effectively now.
Thank you, Lyndon. Magda, I mean, this one is for you, and I think this is just come in. What can you tell us more about ransomware attacks, especially that they are getting really popular?
Yeah, thank you, Tarun. I think ransomware is a very interesting question and topic to address. First of all, it's really getting very popular in Asia. So cyber criminal gangs are not only trying to target companies specifically, but they also build customized ransomware attacks. And in some cases, they as well at the same time in parallel steal data, so they increase their chances to get the ransom paid by the clients or the organizations that are becoming victims. So one important point is that comes up with the ransomware. Ransomware is a malicious software that will encrypt the systems and the files on the company's network or systems in general. So that means that the company will not be able to function. Now, one cyber criminals will try to encrypt first the backup because they know that companies have backup. Second, as I mentioned, they will try to circumvent the company's security measures, so they target the company and they manage to launch a customized attack. That means that the company finds themselves really in a very difficult situation. They are unable to continue to work, and at the same time, the backup is encrypted with a very high ransom in demand.
Sure. Thank you, Magda. This one is for Kiran. With data privacy laws being implemented across countries, including India, which is expected to implement the PDP bill. I mean, we have been talking about it, and it's going to come in near future. How does cybersecurity help with compliance and readiness?
Yeah, I guess most Indian companies in the life sciences industry have some exposure or some business in Europe, and hence most of them would have had some experience with GDPR already. And based on that, I think we should be well prepared for similar laws in other countries, including India. As far as cybersecurity helping in compliance with data privacy laws, I guess data privacy laws, across the world as they're formulated, one of the most important components is to mandate companies to ensure that whatever individual personal data they possess, they have to take adequate steps to ensure that these are not misused or these are not open to public, and they're adequately protected. And we all know that one of the objectives or one of the targets of any cyber attack is to get access to some of this personal data and threaten them to either publicize it in the dark web or sell it to competition or misuse it in some other ways. So in my view, obviously, at least to that extent, all the cyber security steps help in meeting the requirements of data privacy to that extent. So while cybersecurity may not solve all the problems or all the risks coming from data privacy laws, but I think they still form a very, very critical part to ensure that a cyber breach does not lead to a derivative action or liability from the data privacy side as well, either regulatory or any civil action by people. So I guess these two are critically interdependent on each other, and hence cybersecurity also becomes important from a data privacy perspective.
Sure. I mean, I think Karen, that's very well answered. Coming to Mr. Jolly, I mean, we have been seeing or talking about a lot of M&A in the industry. What are the risks you foresee from your experience that is cyber, from cyber perspective, and what measures that organizations are taking to ring fence themselves from these risk exposures?
Yeah, Tarun. So whenever an organization is on an inorganic chart, growth, collection of all legacy systems leads to a greater risk, So a detailed cyber security assessment should be part of our overall acquisition strategy, and we should factor in that whole, assessing these valuations, because the thing is that, even the best practiced companies can be exposed if they acquire a company with a weak cyber or existing vulnerabilities, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, one should be, victimized with these, cyber attacks. So we have seen that who have been victimized. So even if, that acquirer is very sound of in its cyber practices, but the acquirer is, it's a weak cyber in its cyber security. So while having the due diligence, one should be very careful, and the CISO should be consider this very diligently and fruitfully, that how can we taken care this risk, because during the transitions the lot of data are transferred from that acquirer to the acquiree, and the acquiree to the acquirers, and mostly in the acquiring companies, this it is seen that people's processes are not as strong, as because they are kind of posing themselves as that losing and so they are not very careful in kind of putting their efforts on the cyber security. But if you see that liability ultimately would be kind of on an acquirer company, because in most of the agreements the all liability of the predates would fall on it. So the thing is that CISO has to taken care during the due diligence as to how can he take care this weak security into the stronger security, and ultimately this acquiring company has to be weaved, in the cyber risk philosophy of that acquirer company. So again, again that complete risk cyclic process has to be run through, which is an integral part of whether it is cyber or any other risk, whether it is M&A or any other risk, So my answer is that although that risk is much greater as against you are running a standalone operation, whenever you are there in the M&A, risk is far greater, but we'll have to think kind of unthinkable spheres, and that is the only way that if the CISO gives up, lined up, outlines the strategies before that acquisition, that would probably be the only way to save us.
Sure. No, sure. Thank you, Jolly sir. I mean, Loic, would you like to add from your security experience? I mean, as to what challenges you see when there is any M&A which is being kind of conducted?
No, I mean that I think that Mr. Jolly said everything about M&A. What I just would like to emphasize is that it's not only in M&A environment or moment. In fact, it goes back to what called the ecosystem of the life science company. No life science company works and succeeds without a third party, without partners, without stakeholders who are external. And in fact, these people are very expert in their field of work. They are scientists, researchers, and in fact, a lot of them are not really aware of the risks that can happen during the communication. To insist on the use of secure communication channels, first to use them and to teach them how to use. So, of course, like Mr. Jolly said, during M&A, but in normal time also, clinical trial exchanges with the vendor, and also in the tenders and bidding, because people sometimes forget that very sensitive information can be stolen in these exchanges. So I think it's the communication security is something to have in mind for everyday business, I think.
Sure, Loic. Thank you so much. And with this, we come to the end of this webinar session. I would sincerely want to thank all our panelists thanks for your time, and all the audience, that they could get good insight from the presentation made by each of the panel members. So thank you so much. Do keep in touch, and please reach out to your client executive at Marsh if you need any further information on any part of the presentation. You have any queries, you can you can write to us, and we will make sure that the answer reaches out to you. Sorry, with the limited time, we could take on these so many questions. But any point in time you have any query, please do reach out. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.